What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the incredible folks at NerdTees, and welcome to week 6 of my weekly CFL football pick show for the 2019 CFL season. And oh my god, we have lines from Las Vegas this week. There you go. See, like it's not that scary. Like you just got to do your job. You just got to put the lines out when you're supposed to put the lines out. I mean, you're going to get slaughtered again this week, but there's nothing to be afraid of. It'll all be over soon. So, we had a pretty good week last week, pretty good week in week 5, something to build on. We went 11-1. We went 11-1 last week. We absolutely killed it last week. 11-1. The only one I got wrong was I didn't trust Montreal to beat Ottawa, and they did that. So that was literally the only play last week that I got wrong, was not taking Montreal straight up against Ottawa. Went 3-1 straight up, 4-0 against the spread, 4-0 on the over-unders. And don't just believe me, my picks are in the comments section of last week's video. You can go back and double check them yourself. We're 13-6 straight up, so we're just under 70%. We're 14-5 against the spread so far this season at 74%. And we're above 500 at 11-8 on the totals, 58%. We're basically hitting everything across the board. 38-19 on the season so far across every CFL play that has been on these videos. CFL standings remain mostly unchanged from last week. Hamilton out front, a 2-game cushion in the East Division at 4-1 over both Ottawa and Montreal, the suddenly hot Alouettes, who have won 2 straight games. Winnipeg still leading the way in the West Division at 4-0, but you got Edmonton back there at 3-1, and you got Calgary at 2-2, so obviously none of them are very far behind. Where we didn't do so well last week was in fantasy. The official Atlantic Schooners CFL Fantasy Football League. We really plummeted down the standings last week with the worst week we've had all season. 23rd now out of 60 people in that pool. So right in that, what I like to call that meaty part of the curve, and we've got places to improve. Only brought in 46.7 fantasy points last week. A real dud of a week, playing no defense. Andrew Harris, obviously my week 5 MVP. 14 carries for $116 on the ground. He added 5 catches, only 7 yards, but had a receiving touchdown in that Winnipeg game last week. 23.3 fantasy points, basically accounting for half of my production from my team last week. Week 6 CFL fantasy football roster. Right there, and obviously we are going very heavy on the Calgary Stampeders in this game, trying again to take advantage of the Toronto Argonauts on the defensive side. We're stacking Arbuckle with a couple of receivers who are getting good volume from Arbuckle and from Bo Levi Mitchell, but just getting good volume on the season. Markeith Amble's there, obviously. One of only, I believe, 3 receivers for the Stampeders who have at least 20 targets. We are playing a defense, by the way. We are going to play the Edmonton Eskimos defense against Montreal, which might seem silly where Montreal has put up a good number of points over the last couple of weeks, but I kind of feel like the off the field thing is kind of going to bring that back down to earth. We got good value across the board up top. CJ Gable as our running back number 1. I think he should have a ton of value there. So that's the roster for week 6. And our week 6 schedule in the CFL looks like this. You've got that aforementioned Argonauts Stampeders game. That game is in Calgary. Probably not good news for the Argos. You got Ottawa traveling to Winnipeg to take on the Blue Bombers. Quarterback change in Ottawa that we're going to talk about. You got the Eskimos visiting the Alouettes in Montreal, and the Lions are going to Saskatchewan to take on the Riders. Riders coming in off their bye. Let's start in Calgary with that Stampeders-Argonauts matchup. Toronto visiting. They're 0-4 on the season so far, obviously losers of 4 straight games, dropping a 48-21 decision last week against the Blue Bombers in Winnipeg, which I can hardly blame them for. I really can't blame any team in the CFL, really, much less the Argonauts, who are not a good football team. Can't really blame them for losing to Winnipeg, but, so much for the momentum that they gained from the week before. Argos wide receiver Darrell Walker finally showing why he was such a coveted free agent wide receiver. Definitely his best game as an Argo. 9 catches for 188 yards, found the end zone twice, essentially doubling the production that he has had so far in an Argonauts jersey. But even when you have something like that happen, and even when you have something that you can arguably build upon as a team and as an offense, the Argos go peak Argos. And not only does James Wilder Jr., and I keep talking about it, and I'm going to keep talking about it until they fix it, not only did James Wilder Jr. get fewer touches in this game, now he's splitting carries with Brandon Burks. And it's nothing against Brandon Burks. Rookie in this league, looks like he has some potential. I mean, he had more rushing yards than Wilder did in this game, but it's the exact opposite of what I've been telling them to do for weeks, which is get Wilder the ball more. Now they're splitting carries with the rookie behind him. Stampeders sitting at 2-2 on the season. Losers last week. They dropped a 30-23 decision at Hamilton against the Ticats, and that game lived up to the hype. I said that was going to be the game of the week last week, and it definitely was a one-possession game where both teams got their points. Both teams played some defense. That was an excellent football game. A late defensive pass interference call basically seals their fate, leading to the game-winning touchdown for the Ticats. Calgary loses. But kind of like I alluded to, this was a tremendously balanced football game for the Stampeders, which is something I think that they needed after, a slow start to the season, then winning a couple in a row. You just need that sort of calming, balanced Stampeders football. And I feel like that's really what they got for the most part in this football game. Reg Begelton on the offensive side, 8 catches, 119 yards. He also had a rushing touchdown in this football game. And on the defensive line, Cordero Law, I had to make sure I pronounced his name right. Cordero Law on the defensive line, 5 tackles, 3 quarterback sacks. It was a good game on offense. It was a good game on defense. They just took that penalty late. But the real difference for the Stampeders was their inability to stop one guy, and that was Brandon Banks. And this week is one of the only weeks of the season where we can guarantee Brandon Banks is not going to score a touchdown because Hamilton is not playing. But it was their inability to stop one guy. Brandon Banks had 3 touchdowns in that football game, and anytime he touched the ball, it looked like he was going to be a threat to score on offense and on special teams. That was the difference. One emergent threat on the Argos side, that being Darrell Walker, is not going to be nearly enough to right the Argos ship, pun intended, I guess, anytime soon. It's just not going to happen. The Argos are not winning this football game. Calgary's going to roll in this one. Calgary's going to display that, yes, we are still that good. And I mean, this could be the ultimate trap game, but I don't see any signs that this might be a trap game, considering the Argos haven't won on the road since the previous Trudeau was the prime minister. So we're going to go with Calgary in this one. We're going to go with the Stamps. On the line, the Stampeders are favored by 11.5 points at home. I expected this number to be higher. I'm assuming this is a reaction to Calgary losing that game last week, but look at the team they lost to and the conditions under which they lost. I think Calgary continues to gain momentum off of that game rather than losing it. So 11.5 points, it's under 2 touchdowns. I'm going to take that. I think Calgary covers the minus 11.5. Total in the game set at 52.5, just a little bit low for me. I've got this game set at a mid to high 50. That's where I capped it at. So 52.5 points. I feel relatively confident in saying that game's going to go over. We're going to take over 52.5 points. Let's go to Winnipeg now for what I consider to be another heavily lopsided matchup. The Blue Bombers are going to play host to the Ottawa REDBLACKS. Ottawa now 2-2 on the season, dropping 2 straight after starting the season 2-0. They lost a 36-19 decision in Montreal against the Alouettes last week, where they did not look good on either side of the ball. But it was the second week in a row where the defense really was the Achilles heel. I mean, 36 points to Montreal. The REDBLACKS defense allows nearly 500 yards of total offense to the Alouettes, over 300 yards passing to Vernon Adams, which we'll talk about when we talk about Montreal. And they could not advantagize, which I believe is an actual word, but I'm going to use it anyway. They cannot advantagize the fact that Montreal took 11 penalties. They only had 83 yards in penalties, but they took 11 penalties. You should be a good enough team to take advantage of that, and Ottawa just wasn't and isn't. The REDBLACKS lost the ball 4 times just to fumbles in that football game as part of 6 turnovers given to the Alouettes defense. I should say generated by, but 6 turnovers to the Alouettes defense. And they also lost Double D, Dominique Davis. He goes down to an injury, which means It's Jonathan Jennings time. Blue Bombers, meanwhile, are the only team in the CFL to still be undefeated. They are at 4-0 on the season, coming off of that convincing victory, 48-21 against Toronto. I believe that game was in Toronto. It should have been more convincing than it was, to be honest. They kind of let their foot off the gas and allowed Toronto to get some points on the board. But I mean, Winnipeg had 37 points at the half and led the game by 31 points at halftime. Fait accompli. I believe I said in the video last week they were going to make them eat their own socks. Probably the most important piece of news to come out of that game is Matt Nichols basically alleviating any concerns over his health. Another 3-touchdown performance for him. He still only had 209 yards passing, but I mean, look, passed for over 75%, looked healthy. Chris Streveler played a little bit and kind of saved a little bit of his fantasy bacon with a rush touchdown. But I mean, look, the fact that Matt Nichols, you could say Matt Nichols is healthy, that's got to be the biggest piece of news for the Bombers. Lucky Whitehead also showing up again in this football game, this time on special teams. Whitehead taking back a 104-yard kick return to the house for a touchdown. The Bombers defense, they knock down 6 passes. They get 6, I got a fly in my room, sorry. They knock down 6 passes. They generate 6 turnovers off of the Argos in that game. Very complete victory for Winnipeg. Here's a little stat for you. The last time Jonathan Jennings won a football game on the road was week 14 of last season at Montreal. So he beat the Alouettes of last season, the Johnny Manziel Alouettes of last season. In that game, Jennings was only 19 of 30, only threw for 180 yards and threw an interception to the Alouettes of last season. I hate to break it to you folks, Jonathan Jennings ain't winning this football game. Sorry. Winnipeg rolls in this one. No question in my mind. Winnipeg going to pick up the win, go to 5-0 on the season. I'm taking the Blue Bombers at home to beat the Red Blacks in the battle of red versus blue, I guess. On the line, Winnipeg favored by a full 10 points at home. I think you have to take that. It's under 2 touchdowns. I don't see Ottawa putting up a ton of resistance in this football game, so I think you got to take that, taking the Winnipeg -10 side of the line. Total in the game set at 55 points. I believe it is the highest total of the week. I personally capped this somewhere at a high 50, maybe even scraping a low 60, and that's even with Jonathan Jennings, because I know that Winnipeg, I saw it last week, I know that Winnipeg has a 40-ish point ceiling. So, I mean, I know they're capable of putting up 40 points, especially on a Red Blacks defense that's not very good. So they should be able to put up 40 points on their own. As long as Jonathan Jennings can put up something, I think this game goes over. So we're going to take the over in this one, over 55 in Winnipeg, Ottawa. 2 things before we continue. 1, I'm going to plug Nerd Tees, and 2, I'm going to stop for a second and try to get this damn fly out of my room. Nerd Tees, my great friends at nerdtees.ca. Use the promo code BWFinest. You are going to save yourself 15% at checkout. You are going to get free shipping in Canada on any order over $75. If you're in the US, 2 clicks of a button, everything is in US dollars for you. And today's blend is Japanese Orange Cooler, a nice citrusy blend. Probably would be good cold, although I've never tried it cold, but hot, it's quite good, even on what's going to be a relatively hot day. And we got a couple of scorchers coming up here in sunny Nova Scotia, although it's not overly sunny right now. Anyways, nerdtees.ca, promo code BWFinest. Find yourself something to love, or find someone you love something to love. You can do it on nerdtees.ca. Now I'm going to go and be on Fly Patrol. Okay, where are you at? Oh, god damn it. Okay, I think at least for the time being, we are fly free, so we're going to move on. Let's move on to Montreal now, where we're going to see that Edmonton Eskimos, Montreal Alouettes matchup. I think this is actually a relatively tight matchup, certainly tighter than someone would look at in the preseason and say, oh yeah, that's going to be a close game. That's going to be under a touchdown. I think it actually could very well be under a touchdown, and the line in Vegas certainly reflects that. Eskimos are 3-1 on the season now. They won last week, picking up a 33-6 decisive victory at BC over the Lions to sweep the season series against their former quarterback Mike Riley. The offense answering the call for points in that football game. They had points across the game while the defense absolutely smoked Mike Riley for a second game in a row. Get the camera right back in the right place there. The Eskimos put up points in all 4 quarters of that football game. And again, I really called them out after their previous game where it was like, okay, cool, 7 field goals by Sean White, but somebody's got to find the damn end zone. And somebody finally did in this football game. But points across all 4 quarters, 3 touchdowns by Trevor Harris, including 1 on the ground. Sean White going another 4 for 4 on his field goals, has hit now at least 11 field goals in a row, which is always a good sign. And 5 more sacks for the Eskimos defense that they hung up on that BC Lions offensive line, which is not very good, which we'll talk about when we talk about the last game of the week. Just, again, they're not doing well, especially not against the Eskimos. The Eskimos have sacked Mike Riley 12 times in those 2 football games. He is begging for a bye week at this point. And the defense allowed only 210 total yards to BC on offense. It was a whole team victory for the Eskimos last week. And don't look now, but the Montreal Alouettes are the hottest team in the East Division. They're at 2-2 right now. They've won 2 straight games. Hamilton can't say that. They won their previous game, but they haven't won 2 in a row. So Montreal, the hottest team in the East Division. A 36-19 victory at Ottawa, which is a big thing for them to win on the road against basically anybody. But if you're going to take that next step, you got to learn how to win games away from home. Second straight 36-point effort for the Alouettes. The offense definitely clicking, but this time the defense actually contributed to the victory as well. Of course, the one player that everybody's talking about out of this game is Vernon Adams, the quarterback for Montreal, and what a game he had. Threw for over 75% passing, 327 passing yards, had 2 touchdowns. He also had 2 rushing touchdowns, 7 carries for 41 yards. Find the end zone twice on the ground. Definitely a career game for him. And speaking of career games, wide receiver Quan Bray, in just, I believe, his second game in the CFL, puts up a big line, 5 catches for $134, and 1 of those Vernon Adams touchdown passes. Big game for Quan Bray, and that's why he's snuck into my fantasy lineup, because at a discount price, this guy's got 13 catches in 2 games, so if nothing else, he's finding volume with Vernon Adams. On the defensive side for the Owls, Patrick Levels in the secondary, as well as Tommy Campbell. Patrick Levels, 11 tackles in that football game. Huge game for Levels on defense. Tommy Campbell, also another guy in the secondary there. 3 tackles, had an interception, had a fumble recovery. The defense finding 6 turnovers in that football game. Very complete football game for Montreal. The kind of game that they want to play to get as much momentum as possible heading into what is a matchup against a marquee opponent in this league. This is a game where I would love if I could sit here and tell you that I smell the upset coming here, especially where Edmonton won on the road last week. What did I just talk about? Literally last week with the Stampeders and winning back-to-back games on the road. But with the off-the-field stuff that's happening in Montreal, they just relieved general manager Kavis Reed. The stuff that he was doing financially behind the scenes, holding up the sale of the team, there's a lot of noise off the field, and I don't necessarily know that lightning will strike 3 times for the Alouettes on offense, especially against a defense that has been as punishing and suffocating as the Eskimos defense has been this season. I would love to take the Owls in this spot. I just can't. I'm going to take Edmonton in this game. I've got the Eskimos winning this thing on the road. On the line, Montreal's a 4.5-point dog at home, which if this was an NFL game, I might skew on the side of the home dogs. It's also worth noting all 3 of the Alouettes against the spread wins this season, as well as one of their against the spread losses, were as dogs of 7.5 or 7 of dogs of 7 points or more. Sorry about that. Underdogs of at least a touchdown. They're not that in this football game. They're an underdog, but they're a small underdog. It's only 4.5 points. I think Edmonton covers this. So I'm going to take the Eskimos minus the 4.5. Total in the game set at 54 points, a little bit higher than I would have expected. I capped this game at a low 50-51. It's by about a field goal. I think I'm going to sweat this one, and we're going to stay under on this football game. under 54 points in Edmonton, Montreal. And the last game we're going to look at is the aforementioned BC Lions traveling to Saskatchewan to take on the Roughriders, Saski coming in off their bye. The BC Lions at 1-4 on the season, dropping that aforementioned 33-6 decision against Edmonton. And wouldn't you know who won the pony, the luck runs out for the Lions when they're not playing Toronto. That offensive line in BC is simply not good enough to be able to provide adequate protection for a deep ball passer. And that's what Mike Riley is. He's a good overall quarterback, but Riley's got an arm. Riley is a deep ball passer, and they've got weapons that they can get open deep down the field, but the offensive line is just not protecting well enough that they're actually able to get a lot of those passes out. A lot of those passes turn into sacks. John White was average, I think, in his return and his follow-up from that incredible performance he had a couple of weeks ago. He only put up 72 all-purpose yards on 14 touches. You got to get John White running the ball a little bit better, which again is tough to do behind a suspect offensive line. The Roughriders now sitting at 1-3. I would have thought if you'd have asked me what the Riders' record after 4 games would be, I probably would have gone with the inverse of that. I probably would have said 3-1. Absolutely no momentum carried over by the Riders from their Week 3 victory. Just got absolutely demolished at home on both sides of the ball. Cody Fajardo sucked in that game. William Powell sucked in that game. Isaac Harker sucked less than Fajardo did, but still, even Isaac Harker sucked in that game. Big bunch of nothing on the offensive side. Worth noting that all 6 of the Riders' penalties in that football game were taken by the defense, and a few of them really extended some key Calgary drives back when this game was still in question. Like, the game was still in doubt. A comeback was certainly not off the table, but when the defense takes a crippling penalty that extends drives, it often resulted in points on the board for Calgary. They were able to take advantage of those spots, and especially when your offense is not exactly humming along, you cannot take those penalties. Hopefully, the Riders' week off has them pissed off about how they left things the last time they were on a CFL football field. After that Week 4 performance, what else could you be other than pissed off? If you're professionals and you're proud of what you do, you got to be at least a little bit pissed off. And I think Saski's going to be pissed off in this game. And if they are, I think they take out that frustration on what is not a good road team in the BC Lions. I got to go with Saski here. If they were ever going to do it, it's got to be now. So I'm going to take Saski here as probably the more desperate of the 2 football teams. On the line, Saski's favored by 4.5 points at home. You would have expected this number to be higher, but Saski had a terrible performance last time out. I'm going to take it, though. I'm going to hammer Saskatchewan minus the 4.5. I guess I took all the favorites this week, but Saski minus 4.5 against the spread. The Lions are also, in addition to only being 1-4 straight up, they're only 1-4 against the spread, and they're 0-3 as small underdogs. I think you got to take Saski minus the 4.5. I think they get it done. Total in the game set at 51 points. I think this is basically a perfect line. It's tough for me to call because you don't know which Riders team is going to show up. But I think I got to skew on the over here because I really don't want to be sitting there sweating a low 50s total. So I think I'm going to skew on the over here. We're going to go over 51 points in Saski, BC. There you go, folks. Those are the picks for Week 6 in CFL action. Let's go over them here with you one more time. I've got the Calgary Stampeders defending home turf, hanging another loss on the Toronto Argonauts, and are hammering Calgary minus 11.5 against the spread in a game that goes over 52.5 points. We got the Winnipeg Blue Bombers at home, also defending home field, picking up a win over the Ottawa REDBLACKS. We're hammering Winnipeg minus 10 against the spread in a game that goes over 55 points. We got Edmonton on the road. The only road team I think picks up a victory this week. Edmonton picks up a win in Montreal. We're hammering Edmonton minus 4.5 against the spread in a game that stays under the 54-point total, the only under we're taking this week. And the Roughriders at home, picking up a victory over Mike Riley and the BC Lions. We're hammering Saski minus 4.5 against the spread in a game that goes over, but not by a lot, over the 51-point total. The Week 6 picks are in the books, folks. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. The CFL Season 2 has been unbelievably successful in terms of the view counts and the interaction. I'm tremendously happy with how the first 5 weeks have gone from a picks perspective and from an interaction perspective. And a lot of that has to do with you. So thank you so much for taking the time to interact with the show, comment with me, converse with each other. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, fueled as always by the great folks at NerdTees, where you can use that promo code BWFinest, save 15% at checkout. If you enjoyed my little Hulk Hogan air guitaring with the championship belt, I'm trying to get more creative on these thumbnails, try to bring a few more people in. So we're going to keep trying to get a little more creative with that stuff. And next week, it is confirmed, it is on paper, it is ready to roll. Next week, it ain't just going to be me that you're going to see.